So, hi, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. Mm, I want to talk more about my perennial talk topic, which has to do with Shikantaza and just sitting practice. And and even for you, those of you who are working on koans, this really applies because when we're working on a koan, we're not turning it over in our mind the entire time, at least not once we're past the very beginning koans, right? There's a time when we're just sitting in zazen, which means we're doing shikantaza, whether we think about it or not. I know some people like to go back to mu or hu as an anchor when they're not working on another, specifically when the koan's not in their mind or when they're just sitting. I would encourage everyone to do some empty sitting, though, some sitting without an object, which is what shikantaza is, because as long as we're doing, there's to some level Tetsudo or Korin or Futai or Jodo is involved, which is to say our personality is involved, our ego's involved. And a lot of growth and practice happens when we get out of the way. And it is possible to get so absorbed in a focus like mu that we do forget the self. But I would hope that everybody works some with objectless practice as well. The paradox always is that we usually need a technique to get there, right? We need to start with a technique. But the way to work with it is that once we feel focused and in the groove of the practice, what happens if we just release all effort, all trying, all doing? Okay? So, and then the universe gets to grow. It's the same way it grew my arm, right? I was not involved. I mean, I was involved in that I appeared to be in this body and form, but I sure didn't grow it to full size. It didn't come out of the womb this way. It was much smaller, Do you remember? It was we had little limbs and somehow they grew all by themselves. So the universe knows how to do this stuff, right? So what happens in shikantaza or just sitting practice or formless practice is, in a way, it's very ordinary because we're just stepping back into this awareness that we had all the way from the beginning. It never went anywhere. It just got covered over with things. This is what Dogen's talking about when he talks about taking the backward step, right? It means we tend to be focused outward, which makes sense. I sometimes, it's because we developed to deal with objects because in our survival, we need to find things to eat and et cetera. The way I like to express it sometimes is here in Taos, we have a really enormous mesa, right? It's very, very spacious. It's very big. And if you picture us 10,000 years ago, early in human history on this continent at least, that's not so early in terms of our whole human history, but about 10, 12,000 years ago, they think the first people were living here. If you're out there walking across the mesa, there's this vast space, but if something moves against the space, that's important to you, right? Because you're either going to fight with it, mate with it, or eat it, It's something that has to do with your survival, So naturally, as we, we're born into something. Can you imagine when we were born, when we first came into the world, all our senses were functioning, but we hadn't separated everything out conceptually, right? We probably wouldn't even have known the difference between feeling sound, and sight. It would have just all been a wash of sensory information coming in, right? We wouldn't have known how to carve that up. And we take so much for granted about the way we've carved things up conceptually that we don't even think about it anymore. We know a sound is sound and sight is sight, but I wonder, can we put our minds back there to think we've just come out of the womb and, oh shit, this is overwhelming. There's all this stuff coming in, right? What is it? We wouldn't even know how to think what it is. But what happens is, as we start to, this is known developmentally, I've talked about it before, that once we start to give names to things, the first word for many people all across cultures is ma, identifying mom. Once we identify our mother, conceptually, there's a separation that starts to begin, right? Because automatically mom's over there and I'm over here, right? In the absolute, though, there's no over here and over there, right? There's no separation. And of course, we have to go through this process of separating out, or we wouldn't survive, and it's a natural part of growth. But then as we get older, it starts to feel like there's something missing, right? Because that sense of separateness is not fundamentally satisfying to us. There's a sense of lack. Once we start to feel separate, then there's things we need, right? We want that thing. And then this, of course, is the second noble truth of that grasping causes suffering, but also the flip side of it is once we think we're separate, then we think we can push certain things away, right? And so the flip side is aversion. This is something I'm sure we've all reflected upon before, and we all know. But what we may not reflect upon entirely is that underneath that is separation, right? So you could say, otherwise there's nothing to grasp and push away if we're not separate, right? We're just unified, and that's what we come back to re-experiencing eventually through practice. Is that sense of separateness. We start to see past that. But the point is that we built it up in the first place. But that's the part we forget, right? We were not born into that sense of separateness. Of course, we didn't also know wholeness because we weren't thinking and conceptualizing, right? So infancy does not mean we're enlightened. Enlightenment or realization means going through the whole experience of separateness and regaining our sense of unity, which doesn't mean we still don't deal with ourselves as a separate person. I'm not the same as Futai, and yet we're not separate. And somehow when we talk about the human mind being dualistic, and we talk about overcoming our dualistic views, that's what we mean. For a long time, we want to fall into one side or the other. Are we one? Are we many? We have two eyes. One eye sees one way and one eye sees the other, right? The funny thing to me, I was just talking to Miyozan, I was just saying this. We know this. We don't have any problem knowing that my right hand is separate from my left hand, but that they're joined to the same body, right? We just take that for granted. But in so many ways, we're carving up the world as though it was one side or the other. No, I just have a right hand. I don't have a left hand. No, I just got a left. The left hand is the real hand, right? This is the real hand. The other one's a false hand, right? These are the things we get into when we start to glimpse the absolute nature of things through our practice. And then we want to say, is it one way or is it the other way, And I know that was a big thing for me early in my practice was once I really started to see that everything's unified, one thing that immediately happened is all my existential fear just dropped off. It's still the most amazing thing that ever happened to me in practice. That, oh, what's there to be worried about? Everything's unified and there's no problem. I'm not, how can I be threatened by anything? There's nothing outside of me. That was the way it appeared to me at first. But then we get caught on that side. For me, it was, oh, I have absolute trust in the universe. I don't have to think about money. I don't have to think about security. And thus I get into my 60s with no retirement account or never even having thought about that, right? That's falling into the absolute side, right? Yeah, we should really take care of the relative as well. So, I've gotten better at that. Now I have a retirement account, but there's almost nothing in it. So, but yeah, we're always wanting to fall to this one side or the other. And this taking the backward step, it may seem like a theoretical or a philosophical thing, but I can assure you Dogen knows exactly what he's talking about. When he talks about that, where we tend to have lost sight of the background awareness that's functioning all the time, and we get lost in the objects that are in awareness, right? In Shikantaza, we're stepping backward into awareness and we're letting the objects come and go. What starts to happen, we've done some exercises around this before, and I want to do some of that again. But what starts to happen is we live more and more in that, not in the background in a way that we're attached to it, but our kind of home ground becomes more in that awareness. And then the stuff of life goes by, but it's not always hitting us and creating pain in the same way, right? Because we have a different perspective. We have a broader perspective. I was just talking about this with Jodo. There's all this stuff happening in the world. We don't want to be cut off from it, and yet we don't. There's a position where we can allow it to affect us without dragging us under, And when we're too lost in the foreground, then everything's a panic, right? Suzuki Roshi says in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, the single line from that book that's always stood out for me is, he says the foreground is always losing its balance against the background of perfect balance. The background of awareness, if we're standing there, we're less disturbed by the foreground. We can choose to allow ourselves to be somewhat disturbed by the foreground, and I think we should, because we don't want to become cold and uncaring. But if we're too disturbed, we're going to be sunk by it, right? I've been talking to so many people about the current events and everything that's been happening. That's the foreground. And it's a mess right now, right? But our practice should help us understand that, what do you expect? That's human life, right? That's, we might go through relatively calm periods in our own life. We might go through relatively calm periods socially and politically, but our practice tells us it's not going to last. And there's going to be, one way or another, suffering is going to raise its head again. And this is something I deal with my university students all the time, especially the young ones. Very often, when people's lives are not going well early in adulthood, they think there's something wrong with them. And I know that very well because I thought that. I thought, what's wrong with me? Why am I, why am I having so much trouble in life? We weren't raised to expect, we weren't really raised in this culture to know things were going to be problematic, were we? I mean, I thought things were problematic, of course, as long as I was a kid and as long as I was a teenager and as long as I was in high school and all that stuff. But once I was out of all that, I was just going to have the house and the car and the microwave and, you know, the white picket fence or whatever. I wasn't exactly thinking that way, but I somehow thought you come into adulthood, you don't have to listen to what your parents are saying anymore, and everything's going to be fine, and nobody ever told me that things aren't going to be fine. There's going to be all sorts of trouble. It's not the fact of trouble existing is just part of the basis of our relative reality. It's not. When I first fell into a depression in my early 20s, a really bad depression, I thought, oh my God, there's something really wrong with me. What's wrong with me? I didn't realize that happens to everyone, I didn't realize the foreground's always going to lose its balance. And nobody had ever told me about the background. That's what I came to Zen for, is to learn, oh, there's a different standpoint. There's this is maybe an unconventional direction to go in what's supposed to be a Dharma talk, but there's this film, and I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but I recommend it to everyone if you can find it. It's called A Beautiful Mind, and it's about, it's based on the true story of, when we get into discussion, someone will remember the famous economist's name, which I can't remember now. Nash, was it Nash? Anyway, it doesn't matter. He's a genius economist, and he won the Nobel Prize. And I find it odd that there's Nobel Prizes in economy, but apparently there are. And he was a renowned genius. And the film tells the story of how these three figures start to come into his life. One of them is very troublesome. It's a KGB agent who's trying to recruit him. And the other two are not necessarily troublesome. They're his college roommate and the roommate's kid. And the movie's very skillful in that it draws you into his reality, which is that these figures are real and he's really being recruited by the KGB. And gradually, you come to realize that, no, he's going crazy and there is no KGB agent. And in fact, there's no KGB agent and there's no college roommate and college roommate's child. It takes quite a while for him to realize any of this. At first, he just starts to lose it overall. And so he's basically having a psychotic break. And so they put him on the antipsychotic medications. And sure enough, that stops his delusions. These three figures are completely imaginary, right? So the correlation I'm making is we all have more than three figures which are entirely imaginary somewhere in our life which we take as real and they cause us pain. They're not always externalized figures like he was seeing. Mostly they're mental patterns, right? The mental pattern I had for a long time was there's something deeply wrong with me. There's something deeply wrong with me. Boy, is it ever a relief to be able to release that mental pattern and know that I'm just human, So he goes on the antipsychotics and the three figures disappear and he comes into balance and he can function in his day-to-day life, but guess what? He's no longer a genius because his genius is tied to that expansive mind, which also gave rise to the psychosis. So it's not acceptable for him to take the drugs because they kill everything that's wonderful about him, as well as everything that's delusive. The reason I'm talking about the film is, aren't we all like that? We've got all this stuff in our heads and hearts. Some of it's more genuine, some of it's marvelous, some of it's delusive, and it's all mixed up, right? And that's the way it was for him. What finally happens, if I'm recalling correctly, is his wife helps him out by doing some research. She goes back to his college records and she discovers and can document beyond the shadow of a doubt that there was never any such roommate. And when she presents him with that truth, he has to accept it. She's got it on paper, somehow documented that that roommate never existed, which helps him to realize that the roommate's child therefore can't possibly exist, and that it's very likely that the KGB agent is, is the same thing, that these three figures are all delusions. So he decides to go off the drugs, and which means that the three figures come back. But now he knows they're not real. This is where practice brings us, right? We start to realize that a lot of what's troubling us isn't real. For me, it was early in my life, it was certain neurotic worries that I've talked about in other talks. I won't go into them, but very unreal fears. And yet, haven't we all experienced fears that we know are unlikely, will probably never come to pass, and yet they still prey upon us, right? In fact, worry in general is that, isn't it? It's thinking that something's coming in the future that's going to be bad and that we can prepare for it. And I think we all know that a good proportion, the majority of the time, the things that we fear and worry about never come to pass, or they don't come to pass, at least in the worrisome way that we thought they might. And we wasted all that time and energy torturing ourselves over it, and it never happened, right? In similar ways, the other big one for me was negative self-talk, and just thinking there was something wrong with me was only the tip of the iceberg. It was everything was wrong with me at one point. And come to realize that the thinking was creating the wrongness. This is one of the things that Zazen taught me is we're not our thoughts. Our thoughts aren't necessarily, we don't have to believe what we think. Some of what we think may be useful. A lot of it isn't. I don't know if we could say that any of what we think is absolutely true. It's all situational, it's all conceptual, If it's useful, let's keep it. If it's not, can we take the backward step and understand that our practice of letting go of thought and returning to reality again and again, that's the basis of practice. We don't always identify it that way for us, but we're sitting in reality, which means the present moment, and our thoughts are pulling us away, and we catch ourselves, and we remember, and we come back, and eventually the thoughts cease to have so much power over us. And certain categories of thought, it's possible to let go of entirely. So back to the movie. I think his name was Nash. Someone will confirm this for me, but someone or other Nash. Anyway, so he goes off the drugs. Now he's a genius again, but he's got these delusions. And the delusions are pretty intense. The KGB officers right in his face, screaming at him, especially now that he knows he's delusive. He's just really trying to recapture him, right? I may be misremembering some elements of this, but basically, as I recall, the KGB officer is no longer trying to persuade him and gently say, come on, join our organization, be a spy, it'll be cool. He's right in his face, screaming, right? And what Nash has to do is let him scream and not get caught in reaction and not get caught in mental fabrications about what he should do about this, because all of that is just getting caught in the delusion, right? What he has to do is allow the delusion to be and not react to it, right? I'm sure at first he is reacting emotionally, but as he continues to work with it and not grasp or repel, right? He doesn't join the KGB. He doesn't push them away. He just lets them scream. And then I forget what the roommate and the child are doing, but they're there too. And they're all trying to get his attention. And he's just got to remain aware of this, aware in his knowing that they're not real, and just let them be. And what slowly happens over time is they can't grab his attention, so they get less intrusive. They get less loud. They start to be more in the background. He starts to be able to concentrate on other things. By the end of the film, those delusional figures are still there. He'll be working in the library and he's doing whatever genius work genius economists do, which I know nothing about. But he's doing it. He's a genius again. But those figures are still standing in the corner of the library. But they've just lost any power. They've lost any hold they have of them, right? This is such a great parallel for the way our practice is I don't know if I've told this story before. In fact, I may have talked about this film before, but it bears repetition. There was a friend of mine, 3 friends actually. We were all at Zen Mountain Monastery in residence together for off and on a lot over a couple of years. We knew each other really well. And they all came out to visit once when I was first starting my Sage Institute training. They all came out to check out what I was doing. And one of them, I'll call him George. I remember we all 4 were going for a hike out on that mesa that I mentioned before, the big vast mesa. And we're talking while we're out there walking. And George is going, I've been practicing now for 20 years and it's had no effect on me. I haven't changed at all. And the others of us just laughed because we knew what he was like before, And we said, what are you talking about? You're completely different. And he said, no, I'm not any different. And we're saying, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, when I started, I had my father's voice in my head all the time telling me I wouldn't amount to anything and I'd never do anything good in the world, and I was basically a useless human being. And his voice is still in my head. But the funny thing is, in the time we'd known this guy, he'd become a skilled artisan. And he was in great demand for the stonework. He became a master stonemason. And we're like, but you're a master stonemason. Your dad wasn't right. And he said, it doesn't matter. I'm doing my master stonemason work and Dad's still telling me I'm no good. And we said, yeah, but what's the difference is he has no power over you anymore. If he did, you wouldn't be a stonemason. You wouldn't be a master stonemason, right? So we can't guarantee. Some of my delusive voices are gone. I have to say they're basically gone. And I'm very grateful because my suffering has been greatly diminished. But we can't all guarantee that the voices will be gone. But what we can guarantee through practice, I think, is they lose their power. So Mr. Nash still has the KGB agent standing over in the corner of the library, real as day, but he no longer has any power, right? So this is where the backward step takes us, right? If you're lost in the foreground, then the KGB agent's real. If I'm lost in the foreground, there's something deeply wrong with Sean, If we're lost in the foreground, our Father's voice means something, If we step back into our basic awareness and actualize what we develop through practice, which is this ability to let things go by and not, don't get me wrong, it's not easy. We all know this. We've all struggled with our own minds, right? But the more we can stand back and let the things of the world go by, they're still real in a sense, as real as anything is, I suppose, as real as I am, But they don't, we can begin to have some discernment about how much we let them affect us. I said before, when in the first um, iteration of this administration that's in power right now in 2016, I was in frequent conversation with Shishin Roshi because I was finishing my training. And I know I've said this before, but it bears repeating that uh, Shishin would often say, I allow myself to be upset by this. So, which is great because it's entirely possible to use, if you've been around the Zen world, you've seen people who've managed to wall off everything in the world, and that's spiritual bypassing, and it's not what we want. On the other hand, there's people whose boats are getting sunk, but every time some national or social event happens, we don't want that either. And so what I really learned from Roshi at that time was, let's let enough in that we care, but not so much that we're in panic, because after all, it's just more trouble, and trouble's going to come. And I started out to say how it is for young students who come into my classes. A lot of times they're having trouble in their young lives and they think it's their fault. And I see the lights go on because we start sharing in the class, and my classes always get intimate. And sometimes I really see the lights go on, that everybody feels the same way, at least all the young people do, because because our sense of self and our egos, which we have to develop early in life, oftentimes are so fragile that we think things are our fault, but we're not revealing that. And people start to reveal. It's like, oh, this is normal. Oh, this is normal that things go wrong. My translation of the First Noble Truth for college students is, if I try to go to the old translation of life is suffering, they all drop the class. We can't go there. And that's a bad translation anyway. The other bad translation is the second Noble Truth. If we go to old translations, suffering is caused by desire. So you tell college students that all life is suffering and you have to give up your desires, forget it. They drop the class, But those are bad translations anyway. So I retranslated as trouble is normal. It's not your fault. Of course, we can increase our trouble. A lot of those college students do by getting into alcohol or drugs or who knows what, But it doesn't matter if you get everything in balance, you're still going to have trouble sometimes, right? It's not our fault things are this way. That's just the way the world's built. And then we finesse the thing about desire. It's about grasping. It's okay to have some desires, but let's not get too attached. Let's not get too caught up in it. Let's not think that next relationship is going to solve every problem, or that it's going to be free of problems, because trouble's normal, So I want to do some experiments in looking at this with us, okay? So, because in Zen everything's functional, and as long as we're talking theoretical, if it's not put into practice, the transformation doesn't happen. So it has to be put into practice. So I'm going to encourage us to just take a minute or two, drop into our breath, drop into our practice the way we know how to do it. If you're accustomed to using an anchor like Mu, you can use that. If you're accustomed to the breath, we can use the breath. Okay. Now I'm going to ask us to intentionally generate a thought. Let's choose a really simple thought like, let's say good morning. Can we say good morning in our own heads? Sure we can. A lot of our thoughts are automatic, but we also have some influence over them. So we can all think good morning if we want to think good morning. So let's say good morning to ourselves internally a few times. Like a mantra, just keep saying it. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Now, good morning doesn't have too much attractive force to us, does it? We just generated the thought. It's not particularly important. So many thoughts come in and we fasten onto them like Velcro, right? Or we want to push them away. But this is a neutral thought. Good morning, good morning, good morning. So let's take a look at how this works. This thought is appearing to us. We tend to say a thought appears in our mind, right? Now, what is this thing called our mind? It can feel like a little container in our head, but let's back up a little from that. Let's take the backward step and notice this thought that we keep generating. Good morning, good morning. It's appearing in a certain way to us. We could think of it, we often think of it as a frame that we call our mind. This appears in our mind. But other stuff appears in that same space. For instance, let's let a bodily sensation in. I bet you've got a feeling in your knee or your bottom or your shoulder. Can that occupy the space along with, let's keep saying good morning. Now we have good morning and my shoulder. It's good to keep our eyes closed for an exercise like this. Doesn't my shoulder appear in the same space that good morning appears? Pretty much, you know. So how about sound? Is there any sound in our environment? Well, you've got the sound of my voice. That's appearing in that same space, isn't it? It's appearing to the mind in much the same way, our own self-generated thought and our own sensations appearing, right? And then we started out with the breath or mu. That's appearing also in this thing we call our mind. But let's even drop that concept of my mind, because that starts to feel like an enclosed space. Isn't this a big field that it all appears in? Can we bring some of our attention to the space as well as the object in the space? We tend to get fastened on the objects of our awareness. And our awareness gets so filled up that we forget that there is this thing called awareness that's receiving it, right? Isn't that strange? Actually, how about bringing up our name? Let's say our name to ourselves. Generate the thought, Sean or Tetsudo or Koren or Yugen. Or just let's choose our worldly name even, because that's got so much more of a sense of weight and reality. But notice that appears in the same space just like good morning did. It seems to have all this weight and relevance to it because it's my name. But really, doesn't it just appear in this space of awareness like everything else? So we can put all our attention on that. For instance, I'll use Sean, my worldly name. But if I go forward and collapse into that, then everything else that I think of Sean is comes into that, which mostly is kind of a nest of problems, isn't it? I think I have a continuous past, but that's largely unexamined. If I look back there, oh, there's not so much in it. There's certainly not 68 years of past all continuous, although that's the way I think of it. But what if we back up into this big frame? Isn't it just another set of ideas? It's not even continuous. We could sit down probably in a day. I could tell you everything I remember. It's certainly not 68 years, you know. And also tied up in Sean is what I think is going to happen to him later. That's all a story, isn't it? Later might never happen. Okay? We all actually know this. We just don't tend to think that way very much, right? What if we've had this possibility of doom hanging over us all our lives, right? The atom bomb. What if it dropped right now? There'd be no later, right? And that happens to people. We all know people who've died unexpectedly. And they were all thinking about later too. So later isn't real at all, is it? So what's more real? This awareness in which it all appears, or these things that float in it? And yeah, my shoulder's real enough. I have to deal with my shoulder, but so deal with my shoulder, but let's not forget the background, which is, here I am aware, and all this stuff passes through awareness. That's the part we forget all the time. We use this awareness all the time. If we didn't, we wouldn't get to the Zendo on time. Well, maybe some of us didn't. But anyway, we attempt to get to the Zendo on time because we're using this awareness, so we know where the Zendo is. Or we get on Zoom on the right time. This is using awareness, but we don't tend to notice the awareness. We notice the time. We notice this thing called Sean has to get there on time, or maybe people think badly of him. I don't know, you know? In fact, I can get really nervous about getting there on time. But all this stuff is the foreground, right? What if we just take the backward step and just let all that stuff go by? I don't know if you can feel that. It's like a difference in focus, right? I've used this analogy before, but it bears repeating. When we go into a new house or apartment we're going to move to, and it's empty, don't we step in and we go, oh, this is a nice space? And then, of course, we move all the furniture and stuff, and then we stop seeing the space. But that's the same thing I'm asking us to do with our mind. We can look at the objects of awareness, or we can look at the space, which is just awareness itself, right? So what's bigger, the awareness or the stuff that appears in it? Let's just take a moment and look at this space of awareness. I forgot all about good morning, but if we bring it up again, it's in the space, but it's not very big, is it? Not compared to awareness. Once I remove past and future from Sean, boy, it's a four-letter word. What is it even? There's kind of nothing there. I mean, what is Sean in the present moment without the history and projection and judgment? If we want to see what no self is, it's right there. There's not much self in it, is there? Not if we're standing back and just letting the mental KGB agents of our own version of it, our problems, our name, our history, our need, the sound outside. If we just let it stand in the corner of the library, then I don't know, is there any problem? Is there any problem to this moment? So Shikantaza practice means we're taking this backward step into awareness and we're letting the foreground just do what it does. If there's something really sticky that appears in the foreground and we get caught there, often a thought, maybe almost always a thought, or pain in the body or something. If we catch ourselves, can we still stand back from it and let there be space around it? And notice that that quality of stickiness or attachment is also just another object of awareness. It's just another set of feelings or perceptions that appears in this space. An interesting thing to note is of all the things that appear in this space, objects of awareness or phenomena, there's sound, there's sensation, there's thought. Isn't all phenomena created equal from the standpoint of awareness? Just stuff that rises and falls into space. That's the way the world would have appeared to us when we were born. None of it would have been weighted any differently because we didn't have this idea that I have a self and some of this belongs to me and some of it doesn't. So you see a child waving its arm in front of its face. That's fascinated by it. What's this object in front of my face? I'm talking about infancy. At first, they don't know it's their arm, and they'll eventually have control over it, right? It's just another phenomenon. So the perspective of Shikantaza, or just sitting, which we all inhabit when we're not actively working on a koan or the breath or something, is we're just resting in awareness and we're letting everything be as it is. And to go back to the film, when these thought figures appeared, he gave them tremendous weight, and then they gained tremendous weight. And when he stopped giving them tremendous weight, they fell to the background. So the mind we've learned in some way to sift through these phenomena and give some of them weight as part of the self, and some of them, there's a sound outside, it's not consequential, it's not part of me, but this feeling that I call my shoulder, I'm categorizing as part of me. But what if we stand back? Isn't it all just equal phenomena appearing in the same space? Isn't that kind of a relief? What if we let something like pain float in that space? Now, it may not be possible. There's an effort that was involved in the film, and Nash backing up and letting these figures be without getting caught in reaction. There's a price to letting go of attachment, which is it's uncomfortable. And it must have been very uncomfortable for him to have an imaginary KGB agent screaming in his face when he's trying to teach a class or something. But aren't all our neurotic problems and preoccupations, aren't they just our own personal KGB agents screaming in our faces, right? And can we learn to let them float and just know the price is going to be some discomfort? It's uncomfortable to release attachment, but that discomfort will pass. Let's just take another minute or two and kind of like to talk about this, unpack it a little bit more. But one thing I'd like us to notice is if you've really succeeded in backing up into awareness, and if you lose touch with it, you can go back to the breath. When you feel focused up again, notice we're aware of the breath. So there's a bigger space in which it's happening. We're taking the backward step into that space. Just take another moment or two and understand there may be some effort or discomfort in doing that. But once we're centered in that space, I'd like us to notice, does awareness take any energy? Wouldn't it take energy to grasp onto any of these objects? The next thought stream that comes in, wouldn't it take energy to grab that thought? And then getting absorbed in it, wouldn't that take energy? Does it take energy to simply be aware? In fact, is there anything unusual about standing in awareness? At first, it can seem like a bit of an altered state, but really, if we relax into it, then isn't it just perfectly normal, ordinary mind? Awareness, we all use it, we just haven't been paying attention. And being in awareness in this present moment, without tussling with past and future and et cetera, and judgment, all the stuff that preoccupies us. Isn't it kind of pleasant just to be alive in this moment? I mean, it's not bad, is it? The suffering, doesn't the suffering come from grabbing onto and tussling with all these things? Especially the thorniest thing for me to grab onto would be Sean. I mean, having a Sean is a little like having a poorly behaved pet, right? It's, pees on things in the wrong places and chews up the furniture and bites people. And, got all this difficulty to it. But isn't just being alive in this moment in awareness, it's not difficult, is it? It's kind of nice. We can actually stand in this position anytime we want. And I encourage us to practice this way, not just when we're sitting. It doesn't mean that we can't pick up any of the objects and do whatever we need with it. Eventually, after this is over, I'm going to go pick up the objects that constitute breakfast, and I'm going to enjoy that. But if our fundamental home ground is awareness, then all these things constantly losing balance in the foreground, maybe they're not as heavy as we thought. So, got a few minutes to ruin this all and chat about it. Anyone got questions, comments, complaints, objections?